Yes, yes, yes. And that, you know, now we're getting to much more refined levels. There's a guy in Britain called Ian Waterman, suffered from an incredibly rare disease, a viral infection, which destroys your proprioceptive system. And he no longer gets any sensory feedback from the movements of his body. And he's been studied for years by a British, I guess he'd be called a neuroscientist, called Jonathan Cole, who I've met several times. Jonathan has been at, I think, 2 Alexander International Congresses. He's taken what he calls a few lessons. But studying Ian Waterman, this guy went through an incredible process. There's been a TV film made about him. He's in the supermarket and he's looking at the shelves. He wants a can of, I don't know, fruit or something, you know, to add on his breakfast muesli. So there's the canned peaches. And he has to work out, okay, as soon as I start to move this arm, I've got to brace through the back of the body and come back a little. And he's got all that worked out, and he's watching his hand to see when it makes contact with the can of peaches. Then he's got to try to assess the weight of that can and plan in advance how much more he has to go back and brace. Because if he gets it wrong, the weight will pull him forward. Every action of his daily life was performed. And he spent years and years laboriously building up this skill. And it's a heroic feat of human endeavor. And of course it's become a source of fascinating study for the neuroscientists. So you're absolutely right. Did I say this the other day? You know, what's the first muscle that comes into action when you do that? And you know, people think all this stuff. It's actually the back of the calves, because before you've even started that movement, your what's called central set or anticipatory preset goes into action, organizing the postural support system to make sure that you don't fall over when you do that. We have this whole range of anticipatory presets, as I say, also called central set, based on our accumulated experience of different movements, and therefore often somewhat inefficient and inaccurate, as over the years of getting habituated to certain movements, we've kind of drifted from the most optimum way of performing them. And Tim Cacciatore likes to explain the Alexander technique to neuroscientists and physical therapists and so on by talking about re-educating the central set. Inhibition would be saying, wait a minute, I'm not just going to take the stored information my brain has about how I have to prepare for this movement. That stored information is based on a lifetime of habits, and you know, it's time to kind of reassess it, consider whether it's entirely accurate. So inhibit, direct, to make sure I'm saying these are the priorities, keep me up and open, and now let's experimentally perform the action. And in that way, I'm feeding new data into my central set. And I'm giving myself the possibility that I could update the central set and get it more in line with efficiency if over the years of my life it's kind of drifted away from optimum. Does that sound reasonable, Mick? Have I gone off the rails there?
No, that sounds pretty good.
The term body schema gets kicked around there as well, which is how from birth, as you move around, you're gradually building up in your brain sort of a whole storehouse of information. People talk about body mapping, but much deeper than that, the body schema is not just a map of where the parts of your body are, but the whole range of movement of motor patterns, motor programs, and potentials associated with the parts of the body and the things you've learned and so on. And that can drift off from being optimal. And that's remarkably like FM's faulty sensory appreciation, you know. So the central set is like how we bring elements of the body schema to bear on one particular action. And you could explain the whole thing about the technique as you re-educating the body schema by learning to intervene with central set and readjust refined central set, which in turn will refine the body schema. But read Tim's papers about this stuff, because you know, I'm just a very lay person when it comes to trying to interpret what he's saying. I just wanted to finish off there by saying, you sort of get the picture that this arcane hands on the back of the chair, if you actually understand it, it's simply about being able to have active tone in your hands while staying very open in the upper body and shoulders and upper arm, so that as your hands are being active, you're not squeezing yourself in the upper body, because squeezing yourself in the upper body screws up your neck and the organization and balance of your head, screws up your whole thorax and therefore your breathing. And by the time you've screwed that up, you're really in a mess lower down anyway, because you've knocked the whole system out of gear. So if you see all that, you start to see, well, as I said, monkey and in and out of the chair are all about how you organize that support system through the neck, head, and back while you use your legs. Hands on back of chair is all about how you organize that support system of head, neck, and back while you use your hands and arms. And that is your key to any kind of application of the Alexander technique to any kind of activity, except that along the way, you'll realize that if the actions of your arms, hands, legs, and feet are actually leaving that central support system really in its best optimum state, this whole middle area of your body is totally available for breathing. Because what screws up your breathing is when your trunk muscles are desperately trying to give you some stability and support, because the real underlying support system has been messed up and not allowed to work properly. So you get the whole thing then. You get the connection between postural support, breathing, and movement, all integrated, which is the Alexander technique, achieved by conscious inhibition of the primary control.